I'd like to welcome everyone to this special council meeting on July 16th for the Township of Puslinch, and we'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interests and general nature thereof. Do we have any written disclosure of pecuniary interests? Not seeing any, so we're going to start with our delegations. I'm going to ask Mr. Kelso to come down to the table here, and whenever you're ready, you can start.
Well, good morning, Mayor Seeley, Council, and guests. My name is Mike Kelso. I'm the representative for the residents of Concession 11 in Puslinch and the Road Safety Initiative. I'd like to take, I've passed out a handout to all the councillors, and I would like to take a few points from that and just read some of the points that our residents are undergoing here for this road condition. Dear Mayor Seeley and Puslinch Township Council, on behalf of the residents of Concession 11 in Puslinch, I'd like to inform you about a serious, long-standing and ongoing issue which needs your urgent attention. The residents of Concession 11, the road that connects Hume Road to Wellington County Road 34, have been undergoing a terrible hardship due to its poor and unstable and unsafe conditions. The road is a gravel road that's under constant deterioration and at most times is unsafe. The addition of gravel has been made at times only to worsen the drivability, as the gravel has a marbling effect, making traveling unpredictable. In recent years, gravel that was added had to be removed at a great expense due to the depth and unstable conditions it left on the surface. Basically, it was impassable at that time. Excuse me. Strep throat starting. Over the past few years, the condition of the road has deteriorated since it has developed many pitfalls ranging from small to dangerously big ones, including a washboard effect and in some areas a complete washout. A slight rainfall makes the road muddy, slippery, and the surface very soft, making it very dangerous for children riding, boarding, and unboarding school buses, unstable conditions for emergency vehicles and mail delivery. More so, vehicles can't ply freely and are pulled often outside their intended path of travel. In fine, the misery ensued from the subject road can't be described in words. Excuse me. Therefore, we would request you to kindly look into the matter urgently and request that the road is paved or at minimum tar and chipped, and a four-way stop sign installed at the corner of Maltby Road and Concession 11 as early as possible to avoid any repercussions due to the devastating consequences of these safety concerns. So we've petitioned all the residents on the road. We have 100% support, and many folks have sent us letters. I'm just going to touch on a few points from some of the letters that we've received. From Mr. Benziel, he's been a resident for 17 years, and in his letter it says, "It is typical for the road to be nearly impassable during the months of March and April, and often during thaw periods in the winter when the gravel on the road becomes waterlogged and ruts form. At times the ruts may be nearly a foot deep and pose a serious hazard to traffic or result in road closure. The steep ends of the road at Hume and Wellington Road 34 at the lower end became particularly hazardous due to the formation of potholes and washboard ridges." From the next letter from Mr. and Mrs. Bell, "As 28-year residents of Concession 11, our experience has been that during every spring thaw or at times of heavy rain, the road becomes unsafe. This stretch of road is made impassable by soft, muddy road conditions, potholes, and extremely deep ruts, which cause drivers and vehicles to be pulled violently sideways." Seems to be a theme here. From John and Jackie, "We have lived on Concession 11 for almost 17 years, and over that time the road conditions have become increasingly challenging to tolerate. The road is unsafe, damaging, and frustrating to live near. Our main concern is safety. We have 3 teenagers, 20, 18, and 16 years old, who are all learning to become experienced drivers. Oftentimes our road will pull the car, making for unsafe conditions. It is not safe for them nor for our guests to come to visit." The next letter is from the Beresfords, from Nigel. I have lived on Concession 11 for 15 years and believe that the condition of the road has been deteriorating steadily to the point now the road is frequently unsafe. I frequently feel unsafe driving on Concession 11 due to the state of the road. I have to swerve to miss large potholes or risk damaging the suspension on my car. When the road has new gravel on it or added to it, it feels like driving on marbles. And that seems to be the theme all the time. The gravel that is very loose, and it does make you feel like you're driving on marbles. The next letter is from Vinnie Thompson. The condition of our road has deteriorated over the years, and the safety of our family during even the lightest rainfall, spring thaws, and winter storms are a very real concern. And she has lots of other points there as well. From Andrew and Jennifer Beresford. We have noticed a marked increase in the frequency of grading, undoubtedly trying to combat the more frequent appearance of large and larger potholes and areas of washboarding. These same holes then reappear a day or so after being graded. We have seen the application of additional amounts of aggregate, which makes the road nearly impossible to drive on due to a marbling effect. Following a recent grading, subsequential rainfall created a slurry of mud so deep that it threatened to pull our vehicles into the ditch as we have tried to drive slowly along our road. As the number of homes on our road increases, so too does the deterioration of the road due to the increased traffic. As the number of homes on our road increases, so too does the tax revenue collected by the township to provide services to the residents of our road. Providing safe and functional roads are part of those services. And we move to Erica Standish. I get a double whammy as Maltby Road and 11's Concession are both gravel roads and are both in desperate need for hard surfacing. The spring roads were in washed out conditions for several weeks at a time. And there's a couple more. From Mr. Album. I have voiced my concerns in 2012 about the road conditions and was told that paving in Concession 11 is on the 5-year plan. I too personally was told that a few times. Well, suffice it is to say that 5 years has long gone. The gravel road is dangerous and in need of constant repairs. I have 3 children who attend Aberfoyle Public School. I had the scare of my life in 2016 when I received a call from the principal of the school. He said the school bus went into the ditch at Concession 11, but not to worry, all the kids are safe this time. There have been close calls with head-on collisions as the gravel road becomes too narrow with ponding and snowbanks in the winter. My wife got stuck in the ditch on Concession 11 after avoiding a near head-on collision in 2018. Mr. Rahman. My husband have pulled a vehicle out of the ditch this spring just by the intersection of Maltby and Concession 11. The car was driven by an older lady who was shaken by the incident. Her car slid into the ditch due to loose gravel on the road. And the next one is from Uba Rudik. I sent email with pictures 2 times but have got no reply from the city. We live in the year 2019. By the road are worse than in third world countries. The next letter is from the Sandus. It's not safe driving, especially after rain. We have senior drivers at home as well, and they are not able to drive due to slippery, muddy conditions of the road. We either get mud or small gravel stone on the road. The condition of the road is under constant deterioration and at times is unsafe. It's an interesting letter. We encourage you to read from Jim Sorensen. We too have many grave concerns and afraid someone may end up in one. Our vehicles also cost more in maintenance fees due to these conditions. I have a 2018 Buick that has had 2 brake services already, and that's something that we talked about to many folks about, is their vehicles deteriorating and the extra maintenance cost to that and equipment and gravel out of the ditches, etc. This fellow is fed up with stones in the ditch, fed up with the bump at the road from the driveway because the road is being built up, and fed up with losing control of the vehicle. He's fed up of being ignored. Then there's a petition. There's several signatures on the petition. Unfortunately, everybody wasn't at home when we went to do the petition. That's we've got letters. But we have spoken to everybody, and everybody seems to be on the same page. In the handout, there is some photographs that were taken by residents and sent to me, as well as a couple from myself. showing the conditions of the road. Now, it's one thing to go down the road once or twice and say, oh, it looks pretty good. But if you're living on the road, you'll see what the conditions of the road is like on a regular basis, and it changes constantly from day to day, especially after a rainfall. This particular first photos were from this spring. It was almost impassable, and there's a white truck that was stuck on the road. This is on a public road. This shouldn't happen. There's a picture with showing my hand in here. That's just after the road was graded and calcium was put down, and then we had a rainfall and it just washed out again. The puddles that you see in the pictures are all calcium. I believe it's calcium, if I'm correct, that they put down to stop the dust, like help with dust control. But it's extremely corrosive. Now, on the bottom right-hand picture is showing the road just after a rainfall, and there seems to be so much sand on the road that the rain washes the sand through the gravel, and then we're left with this marbling effect. And if you drive the road regularly, you know what I mean. Even if you're going at a slow rate of speed, you could just feel the car trying to wander around. So in addition to these points, I've heard of three reports of school buses being taken from the ditch with school children aboard. Luckily, nobody was hurt on those incidences, but it sure wouldn't take much for somebody to get hurt. There's been numerous vehicles stuck, and I personally witnessed a pickup truck in the small pond at the far end of the road. When you're going to cut the grass or pick up mail and a car goes by, the gravel is flying. My wife Susie here has personally been hit right in the face with a stone. Damage to our vehicles and equipment is severe. There's no point in washing your vehicles anymore. They're just filthy dirty all the time. And, that's not enjoyable, I guess. The other thing that we just touch on real briefly is the maintenance time. Concession 11 is the road that is the farthest road from, I believe, the maintenance area for the graders. And it's a long trip. Not only using more fuel for the taxpayers, more wear and tear in the equipment, more labor, it's also environmentally not friendly because you're putting more emissions into the atmosphere, which we're trying to eliminate. By hard surfacing our road, that is going to eliminate that, and there may be some maintenance over periods of time, but certainly not like we're having now. In closing, we trust Township Council will act quickly to hard surface Concession 11 and save us all from this hardship and major safety concern. So on behalf of the Concession 11 residents, I appreciate your time and your efforts to keep this road safe for us.
Mike, that was a great presentation. It's not lost on me the time and effort it takes to petition a community and organize it all, put it all together, and we truly appreciate that. And I'll open it up to council for questions for you, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Rita?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelso, for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for putting this together. This is actually very helpful to have this. I'm sure it took quite a bit of time. And I guess I just want to start by saying to you that I hear what you're saying, for sure.
Thank you.
I would say that during my time on council thus far, when speaking to residents about what's most important to them, gravel roads is by far the topic that comes up the most often. And I'm empathetic to the concerns that you have about the condition and the safety of Concession 11.
Thank you.
I know it's something important to the residents of that road. I know when I was campaigning, almost every single resident expressed those same concerns on that road.
Yes.
And it's important, and it's important to me as well. It's definitely not an easy thing to tackle. As someone who's elected by the residents of Puslinch, obviously we want to do what we can to base our decisions on the needs and the wants of the residents of Puslinch. And I would say, just as I'm empathetic to the concerns and the frustrations that you have about Concession 11, I'm equally empathetic to the frustrations and the concerns that other residents on other gravel roads have with similar issues and concerns. And it's a frustrating predicament because, of course, we want to work towards improving those roads for all the people that live on gravel roads.
Right.
But how do we choose? How do we choose which is the right road to start on? There's only so much money in the pot. And of course, to further compound that, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sorry. To further compound that is the challenge of the cost. I don't know if you're aware, but earlier this year, we've completed an asset management plan, and that plan outlines a long-term financial plan for us to manage and forecast the needs based on the existing infrastructure that we already have in the township, and that's based on the life cycle of those pieces of infrastructure as well as the risk. And the result of that management plan, the forecast outlines that there's going to be some fairly significant challenges financially for the township to manage what we have already. In addition to that, we're going to hear today about the bridge and culvert inspections that were just completed, and the recommendations based on that are going to present some further financial strain on the township to maintain existing infrastructure. In saying that, for sure, the answer is not to just do nothing. I wholeheartedly believe that putting a plan in place to deal with the issues that we're experiencing with some of these gravel roads is long overdue. Councillor Sapoulis presented this motion back in January to initiate this report and this study that we're talking about today. And part of the intent of that is to address some of these challenges that relate to, what are the financial implications and how do we prioritize these roads. And so that's part of what we're talking about today. And I believe that's part of the reason that Councillor Sapoulis brought that forward. And I hope that you can take some comfort in knowing that by council supporting that motion and by going through this process, that this is sort of the preliminary steps in making a plan to that. And, it means that we're listening and we're hearing and we're trying to take some steps to put a plan in place.
We appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Councillor Sapoulis.
I don't have any specific questions, but I just want to add that we as council agreed to look into this and take this matter seriously. And as Councillor Goyda mentioned, we have budget constraints, but I'm looking at the other side of the equation is one of the things that we are asking for in the study to see if we can extend the life of existing roads, which theoretically, if it's possible, by extended by, say, 20%, a few more years, that money that we need to replace those roads can be pushed out further, and perhaps that might free up some money to do some of the critical work, such as getting on with this, tackling the unpaved roads. So I'm all for trying to see a way through all this. When I was canvassing, it was not lost on me, all the doors I knocked and all the comparisons that were made to the Nasawega. They can do it, why can't do it? Well, Guelph recently did a similar piece north of Concession 7 into Guelph, and sure, it's got some problems, but to me, we need to understand from the experts what we got to do, and I think drainage is a big issue. Perhaps we can do something on an interim basis, such as improving the drainage so the water doesn't stay and get slushy. But certainly, long-term plan is to try to do something for all of us.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Councillor Roth.
Yes, thank you. Well, I agree with what's been said, and I think this council is taking this issue very seriously. Living on a gravel road, I can sympathize. I think the job of this council is to try and get some criteria as to how to prioritize this issue, because I'm sure every person living on gravel road will sign a petition saying they want it paved. So, there's traffic count, there's location, like you said about the graders going further. Traffic is a big one. Number of residences probably fits in there. But this is what this council is meeting about today to head us in that direction to make those decisions and so we can do this properly. And a big problem is the subsurface of the roads. So there's no sense in tar and chipping or paving a road if the subsurface isn't
Understand.
good. And to determine that is a very expensive procedure in itself. So again, maybe we have to work on this gradually and fix some of the subsurface problems and then later pave or tar and chip. It's all up for discussion, but we are taking this very seriously. And unfortunately, the roads were gravel when people moved in, and
Yeah.
now they want it paved. And it's always tough, you're right. Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
Councilor.
Palmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
I get used to saying that. Don't often have a lot of morning meetings. This is great. Thank you for your presentation. I got to say, I'm similar to what Councilor Roast just said. Honestly, I don't think my job is to pick which roads get paved or in what order they get paved. But I do believe it's my job to make sure that we have the policies in place to achieve the expectations, the needs and the expectations of our residents. You know, and clearly from what I'm hearing today, maybe that we're not meeting that on the 11th. But I do have some specific questions, both based on your presentation from staff and from yourself, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
You made a comment about gravel being removed from the road after it being applied, and I wonder if I could ask of the manager of Public Works that if you could put that in context for us.
Do you have a year that this was done?
It was last year. Last spring, they had put gravel down on the road from, well, I'm not quite sure how far down, but from Hume Road down quite a ways. The gravel was so big and so deep, you couldn't even drive through it. Like you literally were, it was this deep. And after numerous attempts to have somebody come out and look at it, somebody finally did and said, oh my goodness, they got the wrong gravel down, there's way too much. So they spent 2 days removing the gravel from the road. And they tried deep grading it a few times first, but that just turns everything up. That's what we find is when the gravel, when it's graded, it can look really nice. It's a real sloppy mess at first, but then first little bit of rain, it's just right back to where it was, right? So, but
Yeah, actually, I do recall that. I think it was 2015 or 16. And I was actually one of the guys out there removing it. And from what I remember is I think we didn't get a very good load from our gravel supplier. It
Right.
was, what happens is when they stockpile granular A, if they don't continually mix it, like the loader operator mixes it as they load, all of the fines stay at the top, all your loose stone falls to the bottom in a cone. Basically, they loaded it in properly, and we basically got a belly dump load of just clear stone. And that was the marble effect that you're probably referring to. And yeah, you can't grade it because it will not pack in. So we had to take the grader and the backhoe out there, windrow it, and truck it away.
you
That's
remember
correct.
clearly then.
Yep, I was the one doing it. Yep.
Yeah, and to this day, that heavy stone is still on our road because was graded in and graded in.
Yep.
So I know they graded and calcium treated the road the other day. We had rain since then. If you go out there today, I think one of the pictures in the handout shows this very large gravel, and that's just all sitting on the top again now, and we still have that marbling
It's
thing.
probably collected at the sides on the shoulders a bit, and that's just from traffic. kind
Yeah,
of
it's-
As it travels over, it kind of kicks it to the side.
Yes, it does, yeah.
Yep.
And into the ditch.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So that issue's been understood and addressed. I'm glad to hear that. You made an interesting point. I live on Watson Road, and just south of Maltby, so I'm familiar with dangerous intersections. And you made a suggestion that there was a request for a four-way stop at Maltby and Concession 11. And I must admit, most of your presentation made me think that due to the condition of the road, that any traffic going up and down the 11th would be crawling. So I'm trying to relate how does the gravel, the condition of the road relate to the need for a four-way stop? Is there something else going on there that precipitated that comment?
Well, two things, and it's a great question. A couple of the residents have driveways that are a little hidden from that intersection there. And one of their concerns was that obviously when you have a paved road, you're going to have increased speed of vehicles. We do have speed limits in effect to curb that. However, some people don't follow those speed limits. So we felt that a four-way stop there would slow them down at that area, and that would make their driveway entrance safer.
Okay,
The
so-
others-
yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and the other part of that, Councillor Balmer, was we looked at, is that going to increase traffic on our road for people finding alternate routes to go to work? But our road isn't a through road like Township or Nossawasega Town Line Road is, where it goes all the way from Arkle Road to 34. Ours goes to Hume Road. So putting that four-way stop there for the addition of 2 stop signs is going to slow people and think, well, this isn't really a through road, so they're not going to use the road. So that's what that was about.
Okay, so those are concerns to address concerns about traffic after it's paved, it's not related to being gravel now, it's related to being it paved later.
Correct.
Super, okay, thank you, that helps a lot. And I just want to clarify that, I sort of to Councillor Roast's point, about the structure of the road. If I'm hearing you correctly, it isn't so much that it's partly that it's a gravel road, but it's primarily that the condition of that gravel road isn't meeting your expectation of a good, solid-based gravel road.
At times, yes. At times.
That helps out a lot as to Councillor Goyda's point about, trying to, in my mind, what I'm all about is trying to bring everybody up to the same standard. If you happen to be on the worst gravel road in the township, we may not be able to afford to pave it, but perhaps we can bring it up to what other people experience as a good quality gravel road. And if that's part of what your concern is, then it gives us a chance to do a step-by-step
Right.
addressing it.
Our main concern in our initiative is to have the road hard surfaced.
Understood.
That's the bottom line for that. And we do appreciate the efforts that you go to try to maintain the road and whatnot. We know that there's a lot of effort and a lot of time and money and grading goes on. But I think the road is past that point that's helping it. It's just a constant turnover, if you would say. The other thing is there's been so much in the years that we've lived there, over 10 years, there's actually almost an 8-inch drop from the center of the road to our paved driveway. When we first paved our driveway, it was even with the road because that's how we wanted to do it. And now it's, you got to drop into your driveway, and a lot of people have concerns with that as well.
Understood. I mean, they recently resurfaced Watson Road, but since I had a gravel driveway, it was fairly easy for it to be adjusted to match.
yeah,
But I understand the challenge you've got.
Yes.
Last point, to Councillor Goyda's point about some challenges that we face here. You made a comment about everybody's on the same page. And just to be fair to those who may not be here today, I have heard, and perhaps other members of council have also heard, there are people who would like to maintain it as a gravel road, but would like to see it as a better gravel road. They may have concerns with the maintenance and especially the challenges that this year's weather has presented the road. So I just want to keep that on the record, that there are those who would like to maintain it as a gravel road, and that's one of the other additional challenges we've got to deal with. So
Right. Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bulmer. I'm glad you brought that point up. I as well received some correspondence asking to maintain it as a gravel road. So, and one of your comments was 100% support. It might be 98%, but there is some opposition out there. On the first page of this binder that you provided us, it says here that a four-way stop sign installed at the corner of Maltby Road and Concession 11 as early as possible. So, are you backpedaling from that statement? Because with your conversation with Councillor Balmer here, he brought up that it would be more of a concern if it was hard topped versus at the gravel stage.
Yeah, it's a good point. It would be more of a concern having it when it's hard top, but one of the residents that brought that up to us initially is the one that wanted to have this stop sign put in as soon as possible, and they were concerned about their driveway. People driving down the gravel road even at this time. So I would say that I'm not backpedaling, but I think that is a good example of a spot that a four-way stop sign needs to be implemented.
And I have the same concerns as council that the sub-base is important, and one of the presentations later today, they talk a lot about that. If we just come along and hard top the road, it could break up in a year, 2 years, and we might as well just be throwing money out the window.
We understand that.
So we need to do the due process,
Yes.
investigate these roads. If we have to rebuild them as a gravel to make them suitable for hard topping, this council's committed to working towards a resolution to this ongoing issue. So I really appreciate your presentation.
We appreciate having us here. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spoulos, that council receives a presentation by Mike Kelso with respect to the condition of the road surface of concession 11. All in favor? Carried. There you go. Okay, so we'll move on to our bridge and culvert inspections. I'll invite GM Blue Plan to come down. Whenever you're ready,
Good morning, Mayor Seeley and members of council. My name is Steve Conway. I'm with GM Blue Plan Engineering, and I'm also here with Matt Scott. And we're here to present the Township of Pushland's 2019 Bridge and Culvert Inspection Report.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Should click through? Okay. So this is a presentation to summarize the report that was submitted to the township for the biennial bridge and culvert inspections. I will apologize if some of the material in here is new or is review for some councilors, but I wanted to start that everyone has the same understanding of what it is we do and why we do it. So the first step would be, why do we do it? Well, there's provincial legislation that requires municipalities to have each bridge and culvert structure inspected biennially by a professional engineer. The definition of bridge is structures that have a span of 3 meters or 10 feet. However, Pushland, along with a lot of other municipalities in Southern Ontario, do inspect structures less than that, just to have an idea of the inventory that they have, because they can represent significant costs even though they're less than 3 meters in span. What it is that we do is a visual inspection. There is no special equipment that is used. Typical equipment would be a hammer, a length of chain, camera, and binoculars. So the inspection is entirely visual. There is no destructive testing. There are detailed measurements taken from what can be readily accessed. However, no special access equipment is typically provided, and that's all covered in the guidelines of the Ontario Structure Inspection Manual, which was last updated in 2018. So we have provided some statistics on the bridges and culverts that aren't necessarily within the report, more of what you would see in an asset management plan. So the township's inventory that we look at is 23 structures, 8 bridges, and 15 culverts. Again, and some of those structures do have a span less than 3 meters. One of the bridges has a load limit. That would be Little's Bridge on Side Road 25 North. And just as it plays in, because the inventory for bridges is so small, 2 of the bridges are relatively new. They were replaced by the City of Hamilton on Pushland-Flamborough Town Line in approximately 2010. So you can see the average age of bridges is around 50 years, and the average age of culverts is slightly less at 45 years of age. As part of the biennial inspections, a condition rating is also given to each culvert. It's calculated, it's called a Bridge Condition Index, which can be used for planning purposes. It's essentially a score out of 100 for the condition of the bridge broken down by each element. So you can see here that bridges have a condition index of about 66, and culverts slightly less at 62. I would caution that because of the small inventory, again, and you do have 2 newer bridges that would be on the relatively high end of the scale, that means you also have a number of bridges that are on the lower end of the scale. However, most of the structures are functioning quite well in the township. So the scope of the report was to complete the biennial inspections. Again, defects are measured and recorded based on material, condition, state, and severity. And then recommendations that come out of that are for maintenance needs, additional investigations, and capital works. Maintenance needs are typically things that the township staff can do or hire out to a contractor to complete as part of a small project. They typically involve things like cleaning bridges, potholes, embankment stabilization, and cleaning out deck drains. Additional investigations, those would be things that you'd want to complete, something a little more destructive, or have a more, I guess, qualified look at of a specific structure to address a specific need. So that would include things like load limit evaluations, deck condition surveys to understand the condition of the concrete, monitoring of crack widths, and reviewing each site for the need for guide rail. Capital works, these would be things that would be tendered out, and OSIM requires that they be divided into one of 4 categories for timing. Urgent, that needs to be addressed right away. Within 1 year, that should be scheduled for completion within one of the next 2 construction seasons. 1 to 5 years, which should be designed in the next 1 to 5 years and preferably constructed, and then 6 to 10 years, which is work that should be scheduled within the next 10 years. So if we go to the cost summaries for this, you'll note that there were some notable changes from 2017, and I'd just like to highlight some of those for everyone's knowledge. One of the large changes was the addition of all of the recommended guide rail needs to the overall capital budget, and that was a recommendation that came out of the 2019 Asset Management Plan. So these costs were always there, they were just presented separately. There is no requirement that we're aware of to upgrade guide rail to existing structures. So what we've done in the past for the township as well as other municipal clients is have those costs separated out so that the township can use surplus funds or institute a guide rail program to look at installing guide rails on specific structures. So the way that this was incorporated into the new report was there has been an additional investigation included so that a site-specific assessment can be completed for each of those structures prior to installing guide rail. And what that would do is allow you to identify whether this structure needs guide rail and then move forward with the installation of guide rail. In instances where there are already recommended works at a structure, it's been included in the recommended works because that assessment would be part of the design process. Another notable change was the mill race culvert. There were issues this spring that were identified, and that is shown up in the less than 1 year category. As well, Moyers Bridge, the timing was updated from a 6 to 10 year to a 1 to 5 year. So that encompasses all of the change that we saw, other than adjusting prices based on current market conditions that we do as part of a typical report. So the mill race structure, again, there were sinkhole repairs that were identified in April. The township retained Drexler Construction to go out and do some exploration. And once it was determined kind of what we felt was the best cause, or what was causing the issues, Drexler came in and completed a repair on the upstream head wall, as well as a gap that had formed between the joints at the middle of the culvert. And this work was completed in June. So it showed up on our reports because our inspections were done in April. However, the issue has been rectified. And as you can see from the photo, it was a small project with a small cost, but we believe that it should mitigate further issues of the structure. The other change dealt with Moyers Bridge, which is on Concession Road 7. This structure can be quite deceiving at first glance. It is a 1931-ish bridge, but it had extensions placed on it in what we believe to be the late 80s. So from a surface glance, it looks like a fairly well-built structure. However, there are some serious issues at the original T-girder structure. The last project that we did on this structure was in 2012, and it was limited in scope. It was only limited to patching of the underside and repaving of the surface. And our experience with those types of projects is they last anywhere from 5 to 15 years, just due to chloride content in the concrete itself. So looking at the structure, we don't believe that another repair of that scope would have any appreciable effect on the service life of the structure, and that's why it's been recommended for replacement. So this is what we're referring to. This would be a shot from the bank, and you can see the newer extensions on the outside. However, when you go underneath, the original T-girder structure has a lot of issues inside of it, a lot of cracked and deteriorated concrete. The patches that were installed 7 years ago now have delaminated or debonded from the concrete to the parent concrete. So we don't believe that another round of repairs would provide any value to that. So in total, 23 structures were inspected, condition data was recorded, and the township received an updated copy of maintenance needs, additional investigations, and recommended capital works. So thank you again, and I'd like to open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you. I have to apologize. I'm sick here. I'm going to make it through it, though. I'll just open up to Councillor Goya.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks for doing this report and these inspections. It was very well done. It was a very thorough report. It's obviously disheartening to learn that the cost of maintaining these pieces of infrastructure is more than what we had planned for, but at the same time, it's important for us to understand what we're dealing with and take the steps to move forward. One of the questions that I did have related to the guide rails, and I think for the most part you answered that during your presentation, but if I'm sort of calculating it correctly, there was a total of 7 structures throughout the summary sheets that call for guide rail additions. And I know that you've just sort of put an arbitrary kind of number there of 40,000, and with the contingency, it works out to be about 50,000. But all in all, that adds up to $350,000 that wasn't really, is kind of new on this report. At least that's what I'm thinking. So, and I think the majority of those have sort of like a time frame of the next 1 to 5 years. Is there a risk in not doing, like what is the, we've gone so long without having those guide rails. What is the urgency in putting them now? And, is there a risk in not doing it right away?
I guess the urgency comes from we need to provide some sort of time frame to it within the context of an OSIM inspection. Understanding that, yes, a number of these structures have existed for several years without guide rail, but as traffic evolves and as driving habits evolve, so too has the need for guide rail. Again, as I said, we were not aware of any requirement to upgrade existing structures within a given time frame. More so what we see is municipalities using surplus funds that they have available to address issues as they can. And again, looking at structures that need it, not necessarily picking structure 1 because it's at the top of the list. If they go through and say, no, this structure would benefit most from guide rail, there have been incidents of I would say speeding or accidents, or if a bridge has been struck or if cars have gone off the road in the vicinity, that's where I would see more value in targeting those structures before other structures.
Okay. In the same section about guide rails, there's a line in there, and it says, at culverts, the installation of a guide rail to increase safety needs to be weighed against the hazard it would be protecting, as guide rail itself can be constructed as a hazard as well. Yes. And I'm wondering if you can just explain what that means.
Yep. The theory behind that comment is by providing guide rail, you are providing something that cars can hit. Whereas if there was no guide rail, there exists the opportunity to veer off the road and correct yourself and come back on the road without striking anything. So some culverts, there is no blanket statement that every structure needs guide rail. And that's what we mean by a site-specific assessment. It plays into the side slopes of the embankments. Once you get off the roadway, there are slopes that are called recoverable slopes, in which case it's been found that, generally speaking, a car can veer off the road and recover in time to get back on the road, versus a non-recoverable slope where a car would be just kind of sucked down further. Even things such as depth of water. Some municipalities have made it their policy that if the water is shallow, there's no, I guess, risk of a car or occupants drowning from veering off the road. And that, again, kind of plays into the need for someone to take a look at this individual site against the criteria in the roadside safety manual, which is published by the MTO.
Okay. Section 4.1 of the report talks about Little's Bridge.
Yes.
And there's a blurb in that report about the possibility about abandoning this bridge and constructing a new driveway. And you've estimated the cost to be about $200,000, but that doesn't include the cost of land acquisition.
No.
And I'm wondering if you have any inclination of how much land would be required, and is there any indication that the land is available and what the cost of that might be?
No, based on discussions with the previous Director of Public Works, it is a bridge that serves a limited amount of people within the township, and Just if you look at it on a map, basically you would drive up Concession 7, cross Mill Creek, turn down a driveway, and then cross Mill Creek again. So just looking at it purely from a desktop exercise, we said, well, it may be more beneficial to look at an alternative
Right.
path to the property south of the bridge as opposed to going through the exercise of replacing the bridge and maintaining it as an asset. We haven't looked at what property is available and what that might cost because the actual alignment would vary depending on I guess, availability of property and legal availability of property and constructing a new right-of-way that would more typically be addressed through an environmental assessment.
Okay. Last question is section 4.3 of the report talks about, I guess we're calling it structure 8.
Yes.
And it talks about repairs to that structure to extend its useful life and protect against continued deterioration. But it talks about a potential cost-sharing agreement with North Dumfries. So what would be the appropriate steps to take to investigate that further?
So again, from the information that we have, which is mostly information contained on the OSIM form, it's identified as a boundary road structure with the township of North Dumfries. So there would, at some point, our belief is that there's an agreement somewhere that discusses who's responsible for
Okay.
maintaining it and then who's responsible for leading capital projects or the cost divisions between those. So the first step, I guess, would be to approach North Dumfries and say, we've got this work coming up, and start the ball rolling with that as to
Okay.
who leads the project and what agreements are in place.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Zapoulis?
Yes, I have several questions. First of all, direct to the staff. Little Bridge, do we know the history of it, of why it was put in there, why this alternative driveway was not done at that time? Seems a little bit counterintuitive. You drive over two bridges when you can have a direct driveway off Concession 7.
So we looked into it briefly yesterday. We didn't have history on file with respect to the history of the bridge, but we did pull the pen and we did confirm that we are the owners. In speaking to GM Blue Plan, and maybe Matt can speak more, it believes it was a continuous road before.
I was able to pull an aerial photograph from 1954, before the 401 was built and Side Road 25 was continuous. There wasn't the gravel pit operation south of the 401, and I believe it's even on that
I
map.
think it's on the map behind me here.
There's a map there still?
So the next question, is Slavinsky Park the only property serviced on that road?
Yes, from what I understand.
Correct.
South of the bridge, I believe.
All right, so I'll be making a motion with respect to suggesting we go ahead with what they're suggesting and see if we can get Slavinsky Park to contribute to the cost of the driveway. Next question, guide rails. You're assuming steel guide rails in your cost estimates?
Yes.
Are post and cable considered guide rails applicable to these installations as well?
Certainly, there are still municipalities that use the cedar post and 3 cable guide rail. The MTO has discontinued the OPSDs for wood post and 3 cable guide rail. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not installed. That just means there is no current OPSD for it. There is an updated, I believe it's a steel post and 3 cable guide rail. I'm only aware of one instance where it was installed, and at that time the price was comparable to steel beam guide rail. But my understanding was that was related to the equipment required to install.
It's interesting you're saying that they're canceling it, but I've seen installations that are along the Highway 401 that has cedar.
A lot of times you would see installations of the 3-wire guide rail along slopes, maybe not against structures.
Okay, the next question relating to extending the life of the assets. Things like cathodic protection, that's something you could be considered to extend the life to eliminate or reduce the corrosion caused by sodium chloride attack?
Yep, and there are a lot of technologies available, and they range from very simplistic anode pucks that can be installed
Sacrificial animals.
or to electrically implemented systems. It's more of a case of where the rehabilitation is and what value that can add. For instance, they're usually used in areas of high chloride content, and also issues where concrete cover is deficient. So prior to approximately the 1960s or 1970s, only 1 inch of cover was provided to reinforcing steel. And I believe in the 1970s, we started using air-entrained concrete, which has a better freeze-thaw resistance. So the MTO has done some research, and they have found that generally speaking, waterproofing and increasing concrete cover are good tools to use. However, using cathodic protection can be assessed on a case-by-case basis, but usually it needs to be, say, a bridge barrier or a bridge deck, something that's heavily exposed to chlorides.
Epoxy-coated rebars, is that another option for?
Yeah, the MTO has gone away from epoxy-coated rebar. They've found that increasing the concrete cover and waterproofing membranes has provided ample protection, I guess, in low volume applications. What we see more of now is glass fiber reinforced polymer or stainless steel rebar. However, there are cost implications to those as well, and they're typically, again, used on bridge decks and bridge barriers and not, say, a whole structure. And in the case of buried structures, it's typically not used.
Arch pipes, is that a consideration for the smaller culverts?
Yep, and there are local suppliers that do both concrete and I guess corrugated steel arch culverts, and that's usually, again, addressed on a case-by-case basis in terms of the size. One of the limiting requirements is the amount of cover that you need over top of flexible pipes, which are CSP or HDPE pipes. Most of them require 2 feet of cover, so there are several instances where it just doesn't make sense because you can't get the material on top to help dissipate the load, and that can lead to premature failure.
Okay, last questions of staff. The 10-ton load limit on Little's Bridge, do we have signs there posted to say it's limited to 10 tons?
Right at the entrance off the 7th, there's a load limit sign.
Okay, we don't have it right at the bridge or anything
No.
like that?
No.
Okay, I don't know how safe that is. I'm just concerned, before the meeting started, the mayor mentioned that single axle trucks weigh that much already, so if they use it to haul sewage away, right away you're off by limits.
Yeah, I assume several trucks use it probably monthly for the park, whether it be sewage, garbage, any type of gravel deliveries or anything that they require.
Okay, so I think that's something we should be writing to them, make sure they're aware of it. That's all I have, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Roth?
Thank you. Thank you for the report. The Moyers Bridge, you said we did some work on it in 2012. I vaguely remember that, and I thought at that time it cost us a lot more money than we had budgeted for. And now it's here again. And this is probably a priority because of all the heavy trucks on it, because they're hauling gravel now from over on 35 to CBM. So there's a lot of weight going over that bridge. So I would think we're going to have to make that one almost a priority. And of course, it's always the expensive ones that are a priority. My question here is, I'm trying to figure out how the OSIN report and the asset management plan tie in together. Like we've always done the OSIN report every 2 years, and it's pretty repetitious unless we've done work. And does that not become redundant with the asset management plan? All these structures are taken care of in the asset management plan as well. Is that not correct?
My understanding of the asset management plan is it deals more with how to allocate funding whereas the OSIM report would deal with how to inform the asset management plan. I don't believe that as part of the asset management plan, a detailed field review of the bridge and culvert inventory under the Ontario regulation would be completed.
Thank you.
Councillor Ballmer.
Thank you. Good morning. My question relates to Moyers Bridge as well. Same concern. It doesn't just service the aggregate or the asphalt plant or the batching plant, the concrete batching plant there. It also, a lot of trucks that come out of our industrial park to access the Hanlon that way. And I'm glad it's been identified for improvement or for protection or enhancement or replacement. But is it at risk in the short term of being downgraded? You've given a 1 to 5 year horizon. Is that the horizon at which it can sustain the loads, or is there a risk that it could, in the next biannual update, we could see a load limit put on it?
Typically, the need for a load limit is brought on by signs of structural distress. So, I mean, anything could happen, but the hope is with regular 2-year inspections that isn't identified quickly, or I guess isn't a surprise when it's identified. As far as it happening before it's replaced, that is a possibility, but it would have to be brought on by signs of structural distress. Those would be identified as part of the biennial inspections. What we have seen in other municipalities is as they have concerns about specific structures, they move to more frequent inspections. So doing an annual inspection or sometimes semi-annual inspections of specific structures just to ensure that those signs don't appear before they're noticed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions for you. In regards to the guardrails, is there any of our structures that require a guardrail currently?
So require in terms of meeting the needs of the roadside safety manual, that is typically looked at from an all-encompassing perspective, including traffic volumes, histories of accidents. So as part of an OSIM inspection, we don't necessarily have all the information to hard recommend that guide rails be installed. The other things that come up is some sites geometrically do not work for the installation of guide rail, and other measures for protecting vehicular traffic can be recommended in those cases, but it needs to be assessed through someone actually taking a look at the site.
And then we can always, if we rehabilitate a bridge, then they can be installed at that point.
And that would be done as part of the design process for that bridge.
I see we're going to have brand new guardrails, and then we're going to go back and
Yes.
repair the bridge 5-7 years later.
And that's-
just get everything on the same time frame. And
Historically, that's been the path when the structure is rehabilitated. That would be the opportunity to review if the township wants to install guide rails, if they're required, and then also to do that installation.
okay. Part of your report talks about the maintenance of the structures and washing them. And so I have a question for the manager of Public Works. Do we have the equipment? I know we have a water truck, but I believe it's just gravity fed to dump on the gravel roads. Do you have a pump and a hose that you can attach so the staff can go out and wash out the expansion joints and the bridges?
No, not currently.
Would any of the fire apparatus, I know one of their trucks has pump and roll capabilities. Are we allowed to use their equipment with our Public Works staff?
In my time, we've never explored that option.
Maybe we could look into that if that's a possibility.
Just on that note, I do know that other rural municipalities do hire contractors to complete annual bridge washing as part of just like a small request for quote process.
So many of our bridges that have the expansion joints, or is this just basically a wash down to get just one? So essentially, we'd just be going out and washing the surface chloride.
Yes, but there are benefits to washing, I guess, any structure with a barrier, salt, spray, any of the bridges, I believe, except for Moyers and Structure 008, do have some bridge barrier, so there is benefit to at least washing those off in the spring, as well as clearing out deck drains and any bridges on gravel roads. Actually clearing the gravel off of the bridge deck is beneficial as well.
Okay. And another question for the manager of Public Works. We've had conversations about the rehabilitation of Concession 7. And was it Moyer's Bridge that you were mentioning that needed to be replaced, or is there another culvert? 'Cause you were talking about the cost of that.
No, that was Moyer's Bridge.
That was Moyer's Bridge.
Yes.
So we might be seeing that in the budget coming forward in September, because, is that correct?
Yes, last time I checked, we were in the 2020 capital works.
Okay, that's all I have. So I appreciate your presentation. And I think we have, did you want to make?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the signage for that little bridge is adequately provided. Typically, when you're driving along the highway, there's a bridge, the sign is actually in front of the bridge type of thing, so, as well. So I just want to make sure that we're meeting the legislative requirements for properly signing that bridge.
It's been posted there for a number of years now, but it's an easy thing to do if you would like it posted at the bridge instead of just
All
at
I'm asking is
the.
make sure we have the legislative requirements properly there. I don't know if there's a distance, certain distance have to be from the bridge or whatever, but all I ask is be addressed properly.
I can admit that it probably is not the first thing they're looking at when they turn onto 25 there, just because there's a Slavinsky sign, and so it is quite possible we can move it for better sightlines for truck drivers to see. Whether they obey it or not is another story.
Did you want to send correspondence to Savinsky Park?
I would
reminding them that-
suggest we send correspondence to them, because that is also a concern. If they're ignoring it, and as you mentioned, single axle truck weighs 10 tons, and we have the limit of that amount, then.
So with our previous CEO, she'd like to see a motion.
Yes,
that
okay,
gives
I'd
that
like to move a
direction.
motion that the staff review the location and sign and make sure it is within legislative requirements. And secondly, that a letter be sent to Slavinsky Park reminding them of the load limit on the bridge.
Can we get a seconder for that? Councillor Muller, do we want discussion on it? All in favor?
Hold it.
Oh, no, I wasn't sure if you were voting premature. Councillor Rowe?
Well, my only question there is, what does a fire truck weigh?
They're more than 10 tons.
Okay, so if we put a restriction on that bridge, are we putting the township at risk because we can't get a fire truck to Slavinsky Park?
The restriction's already on the bridge.
Been there since 1993.
Okay, so I guess it doesn't matter. Okay,
I guess you risk it, and the fire truck takes the risk, but it's not supposed to be daily use or weekly use of overloading the bridges, I guess the concept.
what about a use at own risk? Does that protect the township? Sure, if a truck falls through that bridge, it'll be our fault, for sure.
I think
Well,
maybe
I
we'll just let the manager of Public Works take a look at it and report back what would be the most efficient way.
Councillor Bowler?
Yeah, just the one point I wanted to make is as someone who drove dump trucks and built roads, and to Councillor Sepoulis' point, I think he's raised an excellent question here, in that the odd time you might want to take a chance on if a road is signed 10-ton limit, well, it might be a soft spot, but when you come to a bridge that has a sign that says 10-ton limit, you think twice. So if the staff decide to put a second sign on the bridge, I think that would be an excellent idea, and I appreciate what Councillor Sepoulis is trying to achieve here, to make sure that they know where the limit actually applies. It's nice to give them a chance to not turn on the road and then be stuck trying to turn around, but to identify what the actual limit is the structure that's limited is I think, a benefit as well. So. Councillor Guida?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, all in favor? I'd ask for maybe one more staff recommendation, and that's to contact North Dumfries and look into so if somebody would make a motion for that, and then, that's along the line. So, okay, so we got a motion to just contact North Dumfries on the agreement for that bridge, the border bridge. Any comments? Cost sharing agreement. Any comments, questions? All right, all in favor? Carried. Okay, anything else, Councilor Willis? Do you have another motion? No? All right, well, thank you very much, and I guess it's still your microphone. We'll move on to this is the hot topic.
You can drive this. Good morning, Mayor and councilors. We've already introduced ourselves. We're now here to, I guess last week we provided draft copy of our report looking at the planning considerations for hard surfacing township roads. And today we're going to do a presentation talking about roads and talking about where we are so far with the report. So a little bit of background. The township has 193 kilometers of road, 55 kilometers which are unpaved. And as we all know, the road work is a significant part of the annual capital and operating budget. And as we've heard earlier this morning, there is a desire to hard surface the unpaved roads in the township. So our report is tasked with looking at methods for extending the life of paved roads, looking at a criteria for prioritizing the hard surfacing of gravel roads, looking at effective pavements to be used for hard surfacing roads, and I guess the really hot topic is listing a schedule for the hard surfacing of unpaved roads. So I thought we'd start this kind of slight education segment, I guess, advising everyone of typically what makes up a road. So typically from the cross-section there's a wearing surface, which can be asphalt or it can be gravel. There's a base, typically in the neighborhood of 6 inches of finely graded gravel, commonly known as A gravel. A sub-base, which typically in the range of, let's say, 300 millimeters to 400 millimeters, so a foot or a foot and a half of free grading gravel, which is in the industry known as granular B. And then the subgrade, which is the native material that is found on the site. I will highlight here for people to notice the big thing here is drainage, and notice that the ditches shown in this cross-section are lower than the bottom of that sub-base level, which allows the sub-base level to drain out. Sometimes when we're looking at designing a road, there is some native material that is unsuitable. There's always the option to excavate it out and put in more base material. That comes at a cost. So there are a few products that have been used in the township to sort of strengthen the sub-base. One of that is biaxial geogrid. That photograph there was used last year on Victoria Road, where we've hopefully improved the subgrade by using this material. And it kind of acts, both products kind of acts like snowshoes, and it helps spread out the load. The other product is cellular confinement. This is a product that actually is probably most like the snowshoe. It's a honeycomb structure that you spread out over the road, and you fill it with gravel and compact it, and it acts as a snowshoe to cover up any subgrade that is soft or not strong enough to support the road base. That picture is from concession 2, just east of 32, so right through the S-bend by Little Lake. So in our research, there was 3 main things that came up about building roads and road maintenance: drainage, drainage, and drainage. So just like in real estate, they talk about location, location, location. In roads, it's all about drainage. So of course, number 1 is getting the water off the road. So that's done by crowning the road. So typically in a hard surface road, the crown would be in the 2 to 3% range. On a gravel road, the crown would be 3 to 4%. Getting the water out of the road, that means allowing the granular sub-base to be free draining out to the ditches or to subdrains or some other drainage path. And number 3, getting the water away from the road, typically in a rural setting, that would be through ditches. Once again, drainage systems. So to get water off the road, shoulder regrading. A lot of times you may see on a road, there's little humps at the edge of the road, whether that's from cars driving off the edge of the road, whether it's from snowplow. I think a lot of it's from snowplow activity. Over the years, that little ridge builds up, and it should be cut down to allow that water to drain off the surface of the road into the ditch. Of course, we already talked ditches are a drainage system. Culverts, whether they be driveway culverts or culverts that move water from a ditch from one side of the road to the other. Subdrains, so in areas where you have higher water tables, or if you don't have ditches that are lower than the sub-base of the road, you could put subdrains in, which would allow that sub-base material to drain through the subdrain, and then at some point in time that would have to drain out into a ditch or to a storm sewer. And of course, in more urban settings, you would have storm sewers with curbs and gutters and catch basins where the water is directed along the edge of the road in the gutter to a catch basin or catch basin manhole into the storm sewer to the outlet. Looking at extending the life of paved roads, there's a few different options out there. One is crack treatments, which is typically crack sealing or crack filling. There's slight differences between the two, but typically that's when cracks appear in the road, typically 7 to 10 years, the municipality could go out there and seal cracks. Surface maintenance, there's asphalt recycling, there's adding a leveling course, slurry seals, preservation seals, and surface treatment. So those are all different types of ways to either surface the road or extend the life. Also things to be aware of, if you have soft spots in the road, or if you're going to look at a road, geotechnical investigations are very important. Performance modeling, that's more of a software type approach drawn out of your asset management plan, where you take all that data and you sort of map it all out. And that would kind of tell you when the roads are coming up for maintenance activities or for replacement. Falling weight deflectometer, that's a test to measure the existing strength of the road. Typically, that's done on higher volume roads like highways or highly traveled county roads. Taken from the asset management plan, they listed a criteria, like a trigger for when hard surfacing can be considered. They were suggesting if the road had been regraded more than 6 times, 2 years in a row over 2 consecutive non-winter periods. A bit of a mouthful, but generally it means 6 times, not winter. To have the base inspected by an engineer to confirm that the existing road base is adequate. Traffic volumes greater than 400 cars per day, and that the township has the approved funding. Additional considerations when looking at hard surfacing a road. Drainage, we already talked about that. The platform width, so the width of the road and the shoulders. Sight lines, alignment of the road, the type of traffic that's on the road. So is it mainly cars or is there trucks? Maintenance costs, so past maintenance costs. Risk management, are there any areas on the road that you're concerned about from a risk point of view? Continuity, that speaks to if you're going to hard surface a road, you kind of want to set it up so that you're going from one hard surface road to another hard surface road, so you don't want to be dead-ending asphalt. Existing infrastructure or infrastructure needs, do you need to improve, add storm sewers? And future development, is there a new subdivision or is there a new industrial development planned on the road where some of those costs may be handed over to the developer as part of his cost of developing? An example of that would be Gilmore Road from Brock Road to the east, where that road was constructed and paid for by the condo development. In the report, we've provided a map that shows the roads that have 1 lift of asphalt, 2 lifts of asphalt, surface treated and gravel. So options for surfacing roads. So roads can be a gravel road. That's an option for the surface of the road. It requires regrading, the addition of gravel and dust control. It has unlimited service life as a gravel road, it has unlimited service life as gravel is typically replenished in the township every 2 to 3 years. Another option is asphalt. And asphalt can be a single lift or multiple lifts. Typically requires the start of maintenance after 10 years. The typical service life is 15 to 25 years. And asphalt adds strength to the road base, but it's greatly affected by the base quality. So once again, even though asphalt is a hard surface, it is a flexible product, and it is essentially going to mimic the gravel base that's underneath it. Other options are surface treatment, which is a thin layer of specialized asphalt. Essentially, it's an asphalt emulsion spread out onto the road that then has granular applied to it and then rolled into place. It's typically quite in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 millimeters thick, and it initially needs to be typically installed in 2 courses, and then a follow-up course every roughly 7 years. Typically requires maintenance in the 2 to 5 years range of service. And thing to note here is surface treatment does not add any strength to the road the way that asphalt does. Another option is concrete. That's a rigid pavement. It's less reliant on the road base, but of course it has an expensive capital cost. I don't know of any concrete roads in the township. So part of our report, was looking at implementation for hard surfacing gravel roads. So from the desktop point of view, we still need to have conversations with township staff to sort of go into this phase of it, but we're looking to identify roads that were regraded more than 6 times annually over that 2 consecutive non-winter periods. We're looking to review any traffic counts that the township may have, and also consider any of those other alternative criteria that we mentioned in the previous slide. From there, if a candidate is chosen for hard surfacing, then we would suggest that the township do a field review the existing road structure and the performance of that road with township staff, and assess any drainage, platform, sightlines, and any other potential risks. From there, you would move into a preliminary design and budgeting exercise. Moving forward, we're looking, from our research, we sort of have gathered a lot of local costs from surrounding municipalities and from the work that we've done here in Pushlands. And we're just in the spot now where we're going to start crunching those numbers to come up with cost estimates for construction and maintenance. We still need to have a discussion with township staff to talk about their operating costs so that we can blend that into the construction and maintenance cost estimates. And from there, we'll complete life cycle cost comparisons for the essentially gravel roads, surface treated roads, and asphalt roads. That's generally it. There we go.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the work that has gone into this report so far, and I'm glad that you've come to council while it's still in its draft format to solicit input and on the scope of the report. I guess one of the things that ultimately I'm hoping to take from this report is an idea of whether we're on the right track in terms of the criteria that we have set to prioritize the paving of unpaved roads, but also what the best options are for the roads that perhaps don't meet that criteria. When we had worked on our asset management plan and we were working on the service standards for gravel roads, we had heard concerns at that time that the thresholds that we had in place in order to consider surface treating a road were worded in a way that no road would really ever meet that criteria. And until, I guess, we complete the evaluation of which roads do meet that criteria, we won't really know. But and that's part of the process of what we're talking about today. But there very well may be roads that meet that criteria and would be good candidates for paving should the funds be available. But for the roads that don't meet that criteria, and I could use concession 11 as an example, that road may be a road that requires grading more than 6 times a year, but it may not meet the traffic count of 400 vehicles per day, and it may not have a road base that's suitable to consider for surface treatment. So is there any opportunity for this report to consider, how we will prioritize those roads that maybe meet some but not all of the criteria?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I would say through conversations with township staff, if any of those roads are identified, we could look at them on a case-by-case basis to see if some sort of localized improvements of problem areas could be considered.
Okay. A question about you spoke about the biaxial, I'm probably not saying that right, biaxial geogrid and also the cellular confinement. And both of those applications speak to their ability to reduce the pressure and sort of level out as you said, like a snowshoe. And that they're both suitable for roads with poor subgrade material. I think I read that. If we were to implement one of those methods as sort of like a trial run on a road, perhaps like concession 11, is there one that's better than the other or one that's more cost effective than the other? How would you decide which of those two would be the right one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we almost already have an example of one on Victoria Road, where last year we replaced, I believe, 6 culverts and probably use the GeoGrid underneath probably about 250 meters of road in 4 different locations. So we kind of have a bit of a test subject on the go right now. Both of those products the design is custom to the manufacturers. So they're both specialty products which are designed, if you have a specific area, you would then sort of talk to the various manufacturers and they would come up with a design. And essentially, the GeoGrid product, we talked about the GeoGrid, essentially it is being used to improve the sub-base, so the native material below, and then you have to weigh that cost to the cost of a more traditional way to improve the subgrade, which might be excavate down another 1 meter, take out the bad soil and put in a granular material. So you sort of have to balance off those costs on a site-specific basis. The cellular confinement, which in my mind is actually more like a snowshoe in the actual way it's constructed and used, that's typically used in, say, maybe in wetter conditions, where it's less of an option to excavate as an alternative.
Okay.
The only place I know of in the township where the cellular confinement has been used is on that little S-bend near Little Lake on Concession 2. We have used it in some specialized trench applications for some large diameter pipes in other municipalities, but I don't generally, I don't see a lot of it being used. The biaxial grid is by far more popular, but it is specifically for problem areas.
Okay. So we talk about one of the main challenges in maintaining the gravel roads, especially in the spring and during rain, is due to the poor sub-base material. You talk about the surface treatment of tar and chip, and it talks about the estimated service life for that being about 7 years. But it also says that no matter the number of courses, surface treatment does not improve the strength of the road base structure. So does that mean that tar and chip treatment would be ineffective solution for some of the lighter traveled graveled roads unless that sub-base was, as you say, excavated and rebuilt before we would consider that application?
I would say each road would have to be evaluated, but the subgrade material is key. The base is key. Even with asphalt mimics the sub-base below it. So proper sub-base material, proper granular material, proper drainage is key to the performance of any hard surface on a road.
Okay. And I guess the last question is, again, given that some of the gravel roads present the majority of their issues based on the poor subgrade and the base that they're constructed on, is there value in considering some of these problem roads that maybe don't meet the criteria of paving to actually just reconstruct them as gravel roads? Is that a cost-effective thing to consider?
That's a fairly loaded question. I would say I'll go out on a bit of a limb here. I'll say most gravel roads were probably never constructed to begin with. They probably started as what we would consider an earth road, and then it had gravel put on it, and maybe there were some localized improvements in high areas or low areas where things were cut down or filled up, and then just generally through the application of gravel over time, they've become more of a passable road than days gone by. So I think for most gravel roads, a review of the gravel roads, a review of the problem spots, then could identify potential criteria or potential options for dealing with those problem spots.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Zappulis.
Yes, okay. Let's talk about the paved roads. What I'd like to see out of this report is having a road management strategy. This is where you pave a road and at predetermined times in the life of the road, you employ some sort of strategy to extend the life of the road. I know you made a comment in there that you don't seem to believe that preventive maintenance will extend the life of the road. There's a sentence in there that says that, and I don't know that's really true. So I would like to challenge you on that statement. But anyway, I would like to see consideration given to different methods at predetermined times and what would be the life cycle cost and what would be the benefit of it. Is it going to extend it by 5 years, or is it going to extend it by 2 years? In other words, does it make sense to do it at all?
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. This is still a draft report, so we're still working on crunching those numbers and looking into that. We've got most of the research done at this point in time. A lot of the pavement preservation techniques are designed for roads based on traffic counts and based on the use and abuse of the road from the traveling public. And we can take that into consideration as we wrap up our report with our discussions with township staff, getting some traffic counts that will guide us in those recommendations.
Okay. You mentioned asphalt reclamation is one of the solutions. Is that addressing things like microplaning?
No, the asphalt reclamation is typically what the township's been doing now, where we recycle the asphalt that's on the road by pulverizing it into the granular base, which that process adds a bit of strength to the sub-base, and then putting a 60 millimeter lift of asphalt on top of that.
So I'm suggesting there's probably other techniques for extending the life, such as microplaning. There's coatings to put on, et cetera. Okay, let's get on to the gravel roads. The concern is obviously water. You know, you got to get rid of the water. Is there could the report address the fact that if you have an existing gravel road without drainage ditches, the first thing you should do before you do anything else is put proper drainage ditches? Because it doesn't make sense, these people are suffering through water accumulating on the road, but to me, the logical reason is get that water off the road through drainage ditches.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I pointed out, drainage. Ditches are a key factor to rural roads, and that has to then be balanced off with the, I guess, the aesthetics of the road. There are a lot of roads, when you go over a crest and for hundreds of meters, there's no formal ditch. And there's also in low areas where there's water, within a foot of the top of the gravel surface. So at that point, ditches aren't going to help. But yes, a review of the drainage of the road would be one of the number one things that we would look at when looking at any road. And then it gets balanced off between the cost benefit between adding ditches and that sort of thing.
Exactly. So that would be an important criteria when you do a cost-benefit analysis. The asset management plan criteria, it mentions the 400 ADT, and my concern is that a valid number? Because there's other studies that say something as low as 100 ADT would do a cost-benefit analysis would justify, when you take into account all the maintenance and all that sort of thing, going to some sort of treated road.
There's our review of the of available data related to average daily traffic counts. There are some that suggest at 100 you start thinking about surface treatment, potentially at 200, but a lot of them tend to end up around the 400 as sort of a benchmark. Also, the MTO in some of their documentation use 100, and we've seen lots of other presentations 400, and we've seen other presentations where 400 is kind of a very common trigger out there.
Okay. Is this something we can analyze as part of the report? The other thing is environmental impacts. When I say environmental impacts, we had a discussion here in council, and unfortunately, it didn't make it into the recommendation. I thought when we discussed things like number of residences living on the road, the proximity of these residents living on a road, should be one of the criteria that determines whether or not we go ahead with doing something more than the basic maintaining a gravel road. So I'd like to suggest that be included as well. Okay, and again, getting back to the various surface treatments for Gravel roads, again, like to see a life cycle cost. In other words, determine if you go with a gravel road and you surface treat it with this, you surface treat it with this, what is the life cycle cost type of thing? We, as Councilor Gorda said, we don't want to be throwing money away for the sake of appeasing something when we, appeasing a situation when in fact all it's going to do is just be fruitless in the long run.
We fully understand that the life cycle cost comparison is one of the deliverables, and like I said, this is a draft report, and that's our next stage, once we have meetings with township staff to confirm the operational costs.
Well, what I'd like to suggest we see out of this report is solid recommendations at the end for when to convert to a gravel road, take into consideration of various factors I just talked about.
Okay.
Comments, thank you.
Councilor Rowe?
Thank you. I think we have to look at the township as a whole. Now, if we took 100 count per day, every gravel road in the township would qualify to be hard surface. So that just tells us that, we should be aiming at that goal. And I think in the past, we have not made surfacing gravel roads a priority. And part of it is because of finances, obviously, but sooner or later, there's more and more traffic every day. So if we pave a road, there's going to be more traffic on it as well. So the big concern is the subsurface. So if we determine a road should be paved, meets the qualifications of paving, then we have to have a breakdown in cost, what it would take to do the subsurface properly and the drainage, which would probably cost more than the surfacing of the road. So all that has to be taken into consideration. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need a plan where we can perhaps work on the subsurface on some gravel roads to eventually prepare it for paving or a better surface now, even as a gravel road, rather than just jumping in and spending a whole lot of money on one road. Whatever is the most economical, but I think the big concern to me is that if we're going to do it, we have to do it properly. We can't just hard surface or tar and chip a road just to make it black. We have to make it last. So I think what we have to see in this end report is first off, what roads are a priority, and then secondly, later we'll have to do an assessment on the subsurface, and then we need costs on both of those to make a decision, either by staff or council. But I definitely think we have to make this a priority to improve our road system in the township. And if it means putting off repaving a road for a year to put it toward this effort, I think that's what we have to do. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Balmer?
Thank you. Got a question on the extending the service life of paved roads. I think it was 4.3 or 4.33. You talked about preservation seals. And you used an unusual engineering term that they are believed to extend the life of a road. I'm not familiar with that as an engineering term. I was thinking it was either they do or they don't. Can you help me understand, is there some question about whether they work or not? Is that why the language that you used there?
That's a good question.
Believed to add 5 to 7 years, but that suggests there may not be proof of that.
We would have to go back into our research, and like a lot of these, there's lots of products out there,
Yeah.
and there's lots of white papers and research on what's been done, and we would just have to clarify the findings of that report.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks. Let's see, we could. It was great that you included some additional, we're going to gravel roads now, you included some additional criteria in terms of our service standard for when we decide or how we decide to hardtop a gravel road. And I had a few questions related to some of those, make sure I understand them correctly. The first one was high maintenance cost of the gravel road. And I was trying to figure out, what does that capture that isn't already captured in the needs to be graded more than 6 times and that long criteria? What is this capturing that's not captured in that regrading, counting how many times it needs to be regraded?
Generally, I would think the cost for maintaining a gravel road would be the cost of buying the gravel at least in the township, buying the gravel every 2 years, and then also the operational cost to place the gravel, but then also the grading and any other maintenance cost that's performed by township staff throughout the year. So we still have to meet with township staff to sort of confirm those operational costs.
Oh, okay, so this isn't that there, because my understanding, as we discussed, and in your report, it's an automatic every year, half the township gets fresh gravel. This isn't necessarily road-specific or situation-specific, this is just gravel roads in general?
Yes.
Cost, okay. Then the other one was, of course, drainage has been talked about. But again, wouldn't the requirement for additional grading would also be a reflection of a drainage problem as well, would it not?
One would think that if there's a drainage problem, that it may lead to additional grading. It may not. We would also consider that by improving the road, like what areas do require more drainage to be improved.
Right. Even if they don't require additional regrading, they'd be soft. I mean, they'd still be rutted, though, if they're soft from a drainage problem, I guess, though.
Yes, we could look at, say, a high spot where there's a crown or it goes over a ridge and there's no ditches. That might not be an area that requires grading.
I got it, okay.
But then by hard surfacing, you're going to maybe increase a little more water flow, and you want to protect that hard surface, so you want to make sure that you have good drainage to your subbase. So the addition of ditches then would be required,
Yeah.
or subdrains.
Interesting. I'm thinking of just the gravel roads themselves. And I wasn't thinking to the next stage of after they've been
Yes.
hard surfaced. You make a comment about the existing platform width. So am I to take it from that the minimum platform width is 8 meters? That'd be we wouldn't hard surface a road that wasn't already 8 meters in platform width.
Typically, as part of the asphalt rehab program that we've been assisting the township with over the last number of years, the township standard is a 7-meter wide paved width with half-meter shoulders. There have been roads that have been repaved recently that did not meet that platform width. They might have been short by half a meter. It's kind of a site-specific thing. But from an initial look-through, you would be looking for an 8-meter wide platform width, which would give you 7 meters of hard surface and a half-meter shoulder on each side.
So that's the ideal if we were going to, as another potential trigger.
That's right.
Okay. I guess the real benefit I've found from reading this report is that it looks like, I guess we're trying to achieve, we're putting too much in the when to pave part of the service standard in our asset management plan. It's too heavily weighted on when to pave and not accurately reflecting what we should have as a basic service standard for our gravel roads. I don't know if that makes sense. What I mean is that if drainage is a problem for hard surfacing a gravel road, why isn't it part of the service standard for maintaining an existing gravel road in appropriate condition? And I think we've heard that around the table and from our residents. That is it possible in the final report we kind of split some of these out to ensure that our gravel roads are performing, all of them are performing at their best and at a similar service level, so that if and when the traffic trigger is achieved or whatever other criteria we come up with, that they are in a condition that can accept a hard surface at that time. But in the meantime, there are good serviceable gravel roads. Does that make sense? So we move things like drainage into the basic minimum standards, ditching into the basic minimum service standard for our gravel roads, subdrains. Maybe we can't achieve the 8 meters all the time, but some of these things that you've shown as additional criteria maybe, and even in terms of existing criteria, when we pave a road, should be actually moved into our base standard for gravel roads. Does that make sense?
I think I understand where you're going. I just want a slight caution is there are minimum maintenance standards put out by the ministry that guide the direction of township staff for maintaining roads, whether they be gravel roads or hard surface roads. And those are, now I'm not an expert on minimum maintenance standards because I'm not in operations, but the township staff would be aware of those and I would think would be looking to hit those targets. And, but I think what you're asking is, can we enlarge the report to address criteria for the improvement of gravel roads and stop there. So highlight criteria for the improvement of gravel roads for their own level of service.
Yeah, I guess to inform an amendment to the asset management plan, where the service level standards reside. For example, that, you know, our objective is that all our gravel roads are properly drained, you know, to avoid soft spots. If that's one of the issues that we're having, so that we can go on, start a program of addressing those. Perhaps half of our gravel roads don't need any work, they have no soft spots, but for those that do have soft spots, we can start addressing those with sub-drainage. And so that they're all up to that optimal, they don't have any soft spots. And maybe then the next one is, over time, bring them all up to 8 meters in width. You know, so that gradually our gravel roads all become to a point where if we decide we can, or it's needed to pave them, then that's a separate trigger. But in the meantime, our service standard for gravel roads makes them as good as they can be.
We can have a quick look at the asset management plan that was currently produced with respect to specific criteria related to gravel roads and their maintenance.
Okay. Well, and again, this isn't just maintenance, this is, you know, you talked about making sure it had the appropriate culverts that could support, and all these things that if we're going to be doing things, if we end up having to replace a culvert in a gravel road, make sure we replace it with one that can support hard surfacing in the future, those sorts of service standards.
I would say that we already assist the township with replacement of culverts on gravel roads, and they are, there's no real design change whether you're designing for a hard surface or gravel surface with the replacement of a culvert.
Okay. You just happened to mention that in your report, that was one of the criteria that to look at was where the culverts support a hard surface, so.
Can I?
Sure.
Just what that may refer to is bridges. Sometimes bridges aren't designed to support, say, 60 or 100 millimeters of asphalt.
Got it.
So they need to be reviewed whether the design of the bridge can take the extra weight of the asphalt.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll speak first and then we'll get to English. I just wanted to ask some questions of our manager of Public Works. Do we currently have a ditching program at all?
No, we do not.
You know, so it seems to be the common denominator is drainage. So, you know, we're going into the budget process, and that's maybe something that we need to address is start, you know, ditching these gravel roads. What's the process of determining the sub-base? Is it bore? Is it drilling through the gravel road? Is it just going on the expertise of the manager? Is there use of the soft spots? How do we determine if that gravel road base is sufficient?
It's a combination of all of those things. Typically, there would be the historical information that would reside with the township staff. So if you were looking to look at a gravel road for some improvements, you know, us as designers would want to discuss with township staff as to what are the problem spots, what spots are working, what spots aren't. Then let's go look at the problem spots. Typically, geotechnical investigations would be part of that. You can imagine that, well, a borehole is only 6 inches in diameter, so you're not going to get a full picture. You can't cover the road with boreholes, so you're quite selective with that program. At the moment, both Matt and I are working on, for another municipality, a gravel road potential conversion. And it's 2 kilometers long, and it's had its share of issues as well. And we have like 8 boreholes on that one. And we strategically position those boreholes in the problem areas, and found some bad soils underneath one of the problem areas and found good soils under one of the problem areas. So it's a bit of an art, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Just to bounce back to paved roads, the director of Public Works that just recently retired, one of his suggestions was to go to a double lift on all our roads. Now, I don't know if he intended to do smaller double lifts, and then the maintenance would be removing the top lift and then replacing it, and that would be the maintenance program. Traditionally, we do a double lift on a haul road, and I'm not sure the thicknesses, but I don't know if you've investigated that possibility on these lower volume roads is going to two smaller lifts and then the top one being removed. The other thing, I was wondering if we'd like to see this criteria for paving or surface treating, I prefer to use that term, surface treating the gravel roads. I'm concerned that none of our gravel roads are going to meet the criteria. So can we create two lists? A list that, yes, they meet this criteria, but if none of the gravel roads meet this criteria, then we take into consideration the number of houses on it, the complaints, the direction from council that we want to start surface treating these roads, and then we can take into consideration the travel time for the grader, I believe. And the director of finance may be able to tell me, we're going down to one grader is projected in the future.
Yes, I believe, I don't remember the exact year, but yes.
So we're gonna have the same amount of gravel roads, with half the graders. And in my mind, let's work from the outside in to facilitate, that lower maintenance costs and driving and labor costs. So that's how I kind of come up with this idea of possibly, or just changing the criteria that it's just give staff I think maybe your motion's gonna speak of this. I'm gonna pass it on to Councillor Sapoulis to see his motion. And,
Okay, my motion is going to be that we look at the criteria for gravel road and to include things that are important for our residents, such as the number of residents on the close proximity to the residents are to the road, not necessarily traffic, because environmental issues are a concern. So I'm going to suggest that be included as a criteria. The other point I was going to make is, all the other councils made the same point, is that, sure, we understand that the gravel roads, we can't change them overnight, but there's certain things that we can do to improve the gravel roads incrementally. So Councillor Roth mentioned sub-base, Councillor Bowman mentioned ditches, and Councillor, I forgot what she said, but she did say something that we can't afford it, but we got to make it better type of thing. So the plan, I would think, is develop a strategy for improving the gravel roads as they are. What's the first thing we should do? What's the next thing we should do? And finally, the ultimate would be to pave. So that's got to be included as, I think, as part of this report.
Can we have a seconder for that motion? It was pretty lengthy. Do you have a Coles Note version?
I do.
Can you read that for us, please?
So to look at criteria for gravel roads and to include other things that are important to residents, such as number of residents, close proximity to the road, and other environmental issues, and to look at things that could improve gravel roads incrementally, such as ditches, and a few other methods mentioned. Develop strategy for improving gravel roads as they are, such as a list of first things that we should do, and then the ultimate intent would be to pave it.
Seconder? So we can discuss it. Okay, and then, questions? Do you have any questions? Do you want to go later?
No, I'm just trying to digest all that. Yeah, I'm definitely in support of looking at ways of improving gravel roads to sort of keep them so that we're bringing all of the gravel roads up to sort of the same standard as gravel roads. I think that's what you're saying,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
And I do believe that it's important to consider the environment, how many residents, et cetera, as sort of like the criteria. I'm just a little bit worried that we're adding way too many criteria that, how do we decipher which of these criteria
How to weight them.
is, which one's more important than the other? So I'm not exactly sure how that would be worded as sort of the service standard, but I do think that it needs to be included as a consideration for sure. So.
My response to that would be is we'll allow the consultants to be on a hot seat and come up with a weighting scale for the criteria. To me, it would make sense.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I would support that.
Counselor Roth?
I agree.
Counselor Ballmer?
My concern is we're duplicating work here again. I think where we need to be putting our efforts is into making sure we have the appropriate service level standard that would address these concerns, and then the facts and the staff, our qualified staff, then make those decisions. I don't think we need another study to tell us what order to put them in. I think we need to establish a policy. If we don't like what the service standard is creating, or we think it's missing something, if it's not creating an equity in the quality of our gravel roads, then we need to add things to that service level standard that guide staff to ensure that the roads are all brought up to that same level. I completely agree with what we're trying to achieve through this. I want to make sure we do it using the appropriate tools and not having yet another. We have the asset management plan, the service level standards, and then a third thing. I think we've got the existing tools we need. We just need to get a recommendation through this process to make sure those are worded properly to guide the staff so they can achieve the expected outcomes.
Councilor Bower, my concern is I'm not creating extra work. What I'm doing is basically paraphrasing the comments that the rest of the council made, that there's things that we can do to the existing roads to bring them up to a better state than what they are currently.
Yes.
And that's all I'm asking with this particular motion. And the criteria, for throwing in another criteria, the environmental criteria, which I know we discussed at council and somehow missed getting transferred through ultimately. So all I'm doing is something that's already common sense to do.
And I don't disagree with the objective. We need to identify where we're going to put this. Is this to what end? Are we going to then use this to update our service level standard?
No, I think Councillor Roth hit it on the head when he said, let's look at what we have to do. If ditch is one of the things we have to do, perhaps we defer constructing the road to make sure that we have adequate ditching.
So then if I could, Councillor, then it's staff's determination. My job isn't to determine what needs to be done. My job is to set the outcome. And if staff determines it's ditching, then it's ditching. If staff determines it's subdrains, it's subdrains. Okay. It's the wording of this is getting, my concern is we're not focusing on the objectives, we're focusing on the operations. And I just think our job is to set the standard that we want to achieve and let staff, who I put faith in, determine what needs to be done to achieve those objectives and identify the document where we're going to set those objectives.
Okay. We have a consultant here, and we're asking them to develop the criteria, the approach to doing. That's all I'm asking. I'm not going to tell our micromanager staff and say, thou shalt do this. If staff, of the criteria they come up with, staff say, look, ditching is not a priority at this particular location, it's rebuilding the base. Well, that's fine, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, so then to clarify.
All I'm asking is these gentlemen to deliver a set of criteria that can be used as a handbook for our staff to look at and say, bang, 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 let's go.
Okay, so now 1 second, Councillor Ballmer.
If I can just add if we can add to the resolution that, that GM Blue Plan works in conjunction with staff to determine this criteria, if that would if that would make that a little bit better, we can add that.
I'm sorry, we're on the same page. It's just where we're going to put the outcomes. Now you're talking about creating a handbook for staff.
No, I'm using it colloquially. I'm not
understood.
I'm not using that. I'm saying the report will be the handbook, basically saying this is the final outcome, and this is for staff to implement.
So if I could propose what I'm looking for is that these recommendations are recommendations on how we amend our service level standards to achieve these outcomes. That's where I want to see. Just want to make sure that this is clearly recognized what we're going to do with these recommendations. They're not going to create some third standalone piece. They're going to be clearly used for the purpose of amending, updating our service level standard for gravel roads, or our asset, whatever the appropriate document is to be updated that we already have and guide staff. I want these criteria, I want this information, I just want to make sure we put it in the right place, and that's what's missing, I guess, to be clear, that's all I see is missing from the motion, is where we're going, what we're going to use them
I think
for.
staff has the right approach that whatever comes out of this report, they'll apply it appropriately.
I think that staff understands the intent, and I think we will work, staff will work with our engineers to come up with the criteria, but to also ensure that we are appropriately placing it as a service level standard, as you had mentioned, Council Bulmer. So we will certainly work to ensure that, yes.
Can we have that in the motion, that this is, that these criteria will be used to update the asset management plan and service level standards? And then I'd be more than
That's
supportive.
fine. It's always my understanding that the asset management plan is a living document, and something's going to come out of this that we'll be amending the asset management plan. Simple as that.
And I agree, I understand it's in your mind, but if we don't put it on paper, future people may not recognize that that's what it was for.
That's fine, no problem.
Thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to have a little bit more discussion on it. What I'm getting out of this, if staff feels that it doesn't meet these criteria, we're never going to surface treat any of the other roads in the township. I thought the direction this council was taking is that we want to surface treat these roads. So are we providing the tools to staff that these roads can meet that criteria, or are we putting so much in there that they'll never meet the criteria? And then staff will not feel comfortable coming to this council and saying, I want to surface treat a road. So I'm looking for some support on whether, are we going to start surface treating roads or are we not?
Okay.
Right, that's kind of the question, and I'd like you to answer, each councillor to answer that. Are we as a council looking to surface treat roads? Or are we just looking to increase service levels for our gravel roads? Is there a priority to surface treat roads?
I'll answer that question. Absolutely. Okay. And to me, it's all a question of what Councilor Goyda said at the beginning of the meeting. It's a question of cost and prioritization. There's certain things, we're going to be faced with considerable costs associated with the budget. We may not be able to do a gravel road within 2-3 years. But certainly we can start incrementally. If ditching is one of the things that's missing, let's get on with it. See if we can improve that. Ultimately, let's get on with paving. And I'm hoping the consultant will come up with a cost benefit analysis, life cycle costs of these various options type of thing. And it doesn't make sense to go through that exercise if that's not what our goal is.
It's the last thing I want, is to go through this process and then we don't have any roads targeted to be surface treated, and it just appears to be a waste of resources. So it's great to hear, and do you want Councilor Goyda?
Yeah, I agree. I think that ultimately the end goal and the focus should be that we surface treat the roads. But I think, as we've discussed, in order to do that, we have to make sure that the road is ready and suitable in order to do that. It doesn't make sense to start paving roads if we don't fix what's underneath first. And if we don't have the money to pave it, then we do it incrementally. Whether it's the ditching first, or whether we try this geomatting in certain locations to see if it aids in the stability of the road. But we definitely need to start somewhere. And I just want to say, just based on the discussion that we were having about environment being considered as one of the criteria, GM Blue Plan has already, in their report here, added a whole other list of additional criteria we should consider when we're talking about, when we're looking to make these decisions. So I don't really see the harm in adding this as an additional consideration that we look at on a case-by-case basis as to whether, that's an important factor in deciding whether this road comes first or that road comes first. But ultimately, none of that matters if we don't fix what's underneath first. And so I think really that's where, ultimately, yes, we want to pave the roads, but for right now, we need to first get the gravel roads in a state where they're ready to accept that surface treatment down the road.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, I'm going to have Nina just read the motion for clarification one more time, then we'll vote on it, and we'll just let,
Maybe one of the other councilors.
she wanted me to get back to the motion. 'Cause we're
Yeah, with the-
so we'll finish the motion, then we'll just
Okay,
resume that
fair.
conversation.
And this is very rough based on the conversation. So the motion, or the gist of it, was that we look at the criteria for gravel roads and to include other considerations that are important, such as number of residents, close proximity to the road, and other environmental issues, and to include those as criteria in conjunction with staff, and that this criteria be used to update the asset management plan and to create service level standards, and to also look at certain things that we could do to improve gravel roads incrementally, such as ditches, and develop a strategy for improving gravel roads as they are, such as a list of which things to do, and that the ultimate goal would be to pave the road.
Okay, so that's the motion, and they've commented. Councillor Roth, do you have comment on the motion?
I'm in full agreement with the motion.
Okay.
I think we can't blanket, we say we're going to pave a road next year, but we can certainly look at all our roads as a whole, and then the staff says, okay, we got to do this year because maybe in 2 years we're going to have to pave that road and get it ready for paving. I think the paving should always be the end goal. It's just how to get there that has the priorities set by staff and our engineering friends. But I don't think we as a council can just say, yeah, we're gonna pave a road. It just can't be done that way. It just would be a complete waste of money if we said we're going to pay concession 11 next year because we don't know what the subsurface is like. We don't know what the cost will be. It all has to be a timing thing and a priority thing, and that isn't up to us as council.
Councillor Bowler?
I agree with Councillor Roth, and I understand that I don't disagree with the final thing is, in the end there is, as I spoke earlier, my objective is that to ensure that we bring our gravel roads up to a serviceable standard as a good gravel road, and that they are ready for if and when they need to be and we can afford to hard surface them or surface treat them, they're ready. So I support that as amended.
All in favor? Carried. So back to my comment. My comment wasn't just to arbitrarily pave a road, but it was to make sure that staff knew that council's direction was ultimately to have some surface treated roads, because to me it was getting a little foggy and that it was just strictly focused on gravels. So if staff can work with these tools and find criteria that it fits, then that's excellent. So I don't know if you want further comment on that, Councillor Roth? No. Councillor Bowler?
If reasonable criteria suggest that no roads get paved for another 5 or 10 years, reasonable criteria guide that decision. And I agree we need to have, I think we've all just passed a resolution that says that we're doing this so that to support the paving of all of roads, but we have to be guided by good decision making. We're not just spending our money, we're spending other people's money too, so. You know.
And then I believe the manager of Public Works wanted to say comment, or?
Just to summarize, I mean, I don't want people thinking that this is like the end of the world as far as when we talk about sub-base. A lot of our gravel roads, sub-base is quite good.
Yep.
What I would call ready for pave. There are pockets.
Yep.
Any low spots or anywhere where you have sitting water through a swamp, these are the areas that have to be explored as far as sub-base removal and replacement, or geomatting, or areas like that. So to say, you know, we have to replace an entire 2-kilometer block of sub-base is not the case here.
No.
So between myself and, GM Blue Plan, we should be able to identify, both through me experience being in the literally in the machine, to know every year the problem spots, and to know we've never had a problem in this certain stretch. So as far as the cost analysis, there's going to be pockets of sub-base, remedial work. There's going to be some ditching, but again, a lot of that's going to be sub-base work can be deflected toward the actual surface treatment. So it's not as bad as it's coming across. I just would like to reassure.
That's good to hear.
So it's a little bit more exploration, some boreholes in the bad spots, but again, there are stretches that could be paved tomorrow.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Well, thank you for presenting that. Moved by Councillor
Sorry, I did have one other question.
Go ahead, Councillor Bowler.
Sorry. We talked about life cycle costs, and I made a note on this, forgot to ask it. Would it be possible when you prepare this report to compare your results with the BMA report that we get annually, just in case there's a difference, so that we can understand why there's a difference between any numbers you come up with and the BMA report that we receive annually? Just to avoid any confusion.
Nodding their head.
Thank you so much.
I have one question. These additional requirements or questions, will they be forwarded to us from the minutes? Thank you. Might not be able to read my handwriting.
Perfect. All right.
I saw you gentlemen were taking copious notes, so do I need to put motions for those copious comments I made, such as costing and all that sort of stuff?
I believe we've captured it. I know Director of Finance and myself have both captured most of those, so I think we'll be able to forward them on to the consultant and go from there.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. Moved by Councillor Spula, seconded by Councillor Goyde, that council receives the following two reports from GM Blue Plan. 2019 Bridge and Culvert Inspection Summary Report dated June 2019. Planning considerations for hard surfacing township roads dated July 9th, 2019. All in favor? Carried. You guys don't have to stay for these last parts.
Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Bowman, that the following bylaw, taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. Bylaw 042, 2019, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council for the Corporation of the Township of Puslinch at its meeting held on the 16th day of July, 2019. All in favor? Okay. And 6. Moved by Councillor Bowman, seconded by Councillor Rowe, that the council hereby adjourns at 11:06 a.m. All in favor? Carried. How you doing? Okay, everyone?
I said 11.
Yeah, that's good.